Southeast Asia is one of the most densely populated regions on Earth. Its urban centers are absolute hives of humanity, with Bangkok, Jakarta, Manila, and Singapore all being home to over 10 million people each. But if we look at a map of the region, there's something rather peculiar going on. There appears to be a giant hole in the middle of it all, an area with very few people indeed. Now, the reason why this area is so empty isn't obvious at first glance. After all, it contains two countries, Cambodia and Laos, both of which have had thousands of years of human habitation. So why are these countries so devoid of people? Well, the answer is pretty simple, really. These two countries just aren't that big when it comes to population. In fact, if we compare them to their neighbors, the differences are absolutely mind-boggling. First up, let's take a look at Laos. With an area of 236,800 square kilometers, it ranks as the 43rd largest country on Earth. For context, it's a little smaller than Spain, or a little larger than Kenya. Considering its size, it's perhaps not too surprising that it only has a population of 7.9 million, making it the 117th most populous country in the world. To put those numbers into context, its population density is just 33 people per square kilometer, which is much lower than its neighbors. Thailand to the west with 67 people per square kilometer, and Vietnam to the east with 350 people per square kilometer. In other words, there's almost no one in Laos compared to its neighbors. When we look at Cambodia, things are a little different, but not by much. With an area of 181,000 square kilometers, it ranks as the 99th largest country on Earth, slightly smaller than the US state of Texas or a little larger than Ukraine. Given its size, it has a population of 17.6 million people, which makes it the 64th most populous country in the world. When we convert that figure into a population density, we get 97 people per square kilometer. Again, that's much lower than its neighbors. Thailand to the west with 142 people per square kilometer, and Vietnam to the east with 350 people per square kilometer. And so once again, Cambodia's population density is abnormally low when compared to its neighbors. So now you might be thinking, okay, maybe these two countries are just sparsely populated because they're rural, mountainous, or something like that. They're not great places to live. But that's actually not the case at all. Both countries are quite nice places to live, with thriving cities, tons of natural beauty, and plenty of economic opportunities. In fact, if anything, both countries are growing faster than their neighbors. Between 2020 and 2023, for example, Cambodia's GDP grew a staggering 8% per year, which is more than double that of Thailand or Vietnam. But despite their impressive growth, their populations are still tiny compared to their neighbors. So what gives? Why are these two countries so absurdly empty? Well, to answer that question, we need to take a trip back in time to the 1960s and 70s. During the height of the Cold War, the world was a rather tense place, as the two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, flexed their militaries and supported various proxy conflicts around the world. One such conflict was the Vietnam War. Now, if you know anything about the Vietnam War, then you'll probably know that it was primarily fought in the north and south of Vietnam. But what you may not realize is that large parts of the war were also fought in neighboring Laos. You see, the main objective of the US in the Vietnam War was to stop the spread of communism. At the time, there was a major communist supply route running from Vietnam into neighboring Laos. The US called this the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and it became a major target during the war. As a result, starting in 1964, the US began an intense aerial bombing campaign of Laos. Laos had never really been bombed before. It wasn't a major player in the war and generally tried to remain neutral, but unfortunately for the country, its location meant that it got caught up in the crossfire, and boy, did it get bombed. Over the next 9 years, the US dropped over 2.5 million tons of bombs on Laos, which is about 300 times heavier than the bombs dropped on Hiroshima. More than half of those bombs were actually dropped on rural areas and jungles, meaning that most of the bombs didn't even hit military targets. Instead, they devastated villages and countryside. By the end of the war in 1975, Laos had been reduced to a wasteland. Its infrastructure was in ruins. Its economy was in sharp decline, and its population had been decimated. Unfortunately for Laos, this would not be the last time that it would suffer greatly due to foreign intervention. Just across the Mekong River, another major conflict was taking place, the Cambodian Civil War. Like Laos, Cambodia had tried to remain neutral in this conflict, but it too got dragged in as various factions from the war sought refuge within the country. Once again, Cambodia's neutrality meant that it became a battleground between these factions, and once again it was bombed to oblivion. On March 1970, for example, the US firebombed the capital city of Phnom Penh in an effort to weaken the communist Khmer Rouge movement. By 1975, Cambodia was effectively a failed state. Its infrastructure was destroyed, its economy was collapsed, and millions of its citizens had died. The combined effects of these two conflicts would have lasting consequences for the entire region. For decades afterwards, the three countries would continue to suffer from the ongoing wars and the influx of refugees. In Cambodia's case, the Khmer Rouge regime in particular would go on to commit some of the most horrific atrocities in modern history. Between 1975 and 1979, this radical communist government would forcibly relocate the vast majority of Cambodians into rural labor camps, where they were subjected to hard labor and starvation. It's estimated that around 2 million people died during this period. Today, however, all three countries have seen remarkable recoveries. The wounds of war are slowly healing, and each country is looking towards a prosperous future. In Cambodia's case, the country is growing faster than any of its neighbors, and poverty rates have been steadily declining. In Laos, a new constitution was introduced in 1991, and it gradually transitioned into a capitalist market economy. Today, it boasts some of the fastest economic growth in the world. And as for Thailand, well, it's been a stable democracy since 1976 and is a major player in global trade. But despite their strong recoveries, the damage done during the war years never truly healed. For decades, these countries were effectively stuck in a vicious cycle. Because so many people had died and fled the countries, both countries had very small and aging populations. This meant that fewer people were working and producing goods and services, which in turn meant that the countries were not generating enough wealth to improve living standards. Not to mention the huge costs associated with clearing landmines and unexploded bombs left over from the war. All of this meant that these countries struggled to develop and their populations remained very small. Over the last few decades, though, the situation has improved somewhat. People have begun to return to these countries and living standards have been steadily improving. But ultimately, it will take decades, if not centuries, for these countries to reach anywhere near their potential. If things had gone differently, and these countries had been bombed to oblivion in the 1960s and 70s, it's likely that their populations would be much larger today. As it stands, though, their populations remain abnormally low for their size, and they're unlikely to change anytime soon. So there we have it, the reason why Cambodia and Laos are absurdly empty. The lingering effects of the Vietnam War and the Cambodian Civil War. These two countries suffered tremendously during the war years, and their populations never fully recovered. But despite the challenges they face, both countries are looking towards a brighter future. Only time will tell what the coming decades hold for them. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please consider subscribing. Thanks for watching.